only among male because of the seminary education, but also among women because of the Colegio de Santa Isabel, which trained earlier on for young women, for young girls, because as I said, later in the Spanish era, they opened up what you called a Escuela de Niñas, so girls' school, but later on, there was no high school level at the time. The young boys already have high school at the seminary, so they opened a certain high school level at the Escuela Normal de Primera Enseñanza. Not only, but later on they realized that not only that they have to educate the young women, but they also have to produce teachers. So they opened the Escuela Normal de Primera Enseñanza. Escuela Normal, it doesn't mean to say there is an abnormal school. So Escuela Normal is a normative school, meaning to say you train teachers. So once you train teachers, we elevate the status of women in the Bicol region by way of the Colegio de Santa Isabel. Can we proceed? Just to show you that Naga was the center of culture and religion, it's very, very evident in this 1803 map. The religiosity of the city of Nueva Cáceres. If you notice, you have San Francisco Church, the other upper part. You have the Peña Church. You have San Francisco Church. You have Cathedral. The cathedral, by the way, is not located where it is now. It used to be at the supermarket. So that was where the original cathedral was. So the cathedral, and then you have Camaligan. Camaligan, by the way, if you're from Camaligan, you were once a part of Nueva Cáceres. So part of a barrio of Nueva Cáceres, or what they call in Spanish documents, aldea, or pueblecillo, or pueblecito, whichever words you use. But then it means that you are just a small part of Nueva Cáceres. But then it's important because of the fact that you are influenced, affected by whatever development there was in Nueva Cáceres at the time. So if you will notice, San Francisco Church is not positioned towards the road as you see it today. The San Francisco Church is positioned towards the river. The portal today at San Francisco Church, when you go to San Francisco Church, there is a door there. It used to be actually a cemetery. Okay? So the area here where you have the Quince Martires, you have that used to be a cemetery. So churches at the time, the cemetery at the time were always located at the back of the church, of the altar. The reason, there is a certain theological argument there. So that when the priest, whenever he blesses the altar, because at the time the priest is positioned towards Christ, unlike today when the priest looks at the people. At the time, no. The priest is always positioned towards Christ, towards the altar. So when he blesses the altar, he's supposed to have been blessing the people buried at the back of the altar. That's the theological reason why cemeteries were located at the back of the altar. That's not an opinion. It's an established norm in the church at the time. So it gave you an idea of the way the churches are located here in Nueva Cáceres. So it's a very, very, in a way, it gave you an insight on the way we look at Nueva Cáceres as a center of religion. It's a center of the Franciscan mission. By the way, the Franciscan mission here, one of the earliest churches in the Philippines established by the Franciscans was in Nueva Cáceres. The reason, the first batch of the Franciscans who came from Spain at the time, or their mission, they arrived in 1578, they made a landfall. They landed here either in Pasacao or in Sorsogon. At the time, if you land in Sorsogon and the weather is no longer favorable for you to move to Manila, the passengers in the galleon would generally walk from Sorsogon, from Magallanes, Sorsogon, all the way to Manila. And it took them about 3 months on journey. And so that's it. Can we now proceed? So this is the cathedral from a certain print in Spain, 1875. That's already how it looked like. But it's now in the present location. Originally, as I was telling you, the cathedral was located on the bank of the Bicol River, where the supermarket now stands. but it was transferred to the present site because of an earthquake in 1811, very, very massive earthquake, as you probably have heard of the earthquake in Davao. We also have that kind of sufferings in in the Spanish era. And one of the, as I said, one of the most powerful recorded earthquakes based on the documents we got from Civil was in 1811, where most of the churches in the Bicol region went down. And some subsequent Jesuit scientists in the late 19th century theorized that the 1811 earthquake was actually a precursor of the 1814 Mayon eruption. So they suspect it was volcanic in nature. And so that's basically, that's why they eventually transferred the location of the church to the present site, because they said it's located on a much higher place and also on a much solid foundation, because the original site of the church in the supermarket was frequently flooded when the Bicol River rises and the water gets into the church. So they said not very convenient to have a church in that particular location. Of course, this is how the Episcopal Palace looks like. So before it was bombed in 1945. It's a very, very elegant architecture of the 19th century. The Peña Francia Church. The Peña Francia, of course, became a major religious devotions among the Bicolanos starting in 1700s. It was introduced in Naga in 1690, but it eventually evolved into a major regional devotion by about the middle of the 19th century. So again, a misconception. We always thought that the Peña Francia had always been a major celebration. That's not actually true. In the 1700s, the Peña Francia was only confined to Naga City. But only by the middle of the 19th century when it evolved into a regional devotion. Why? The reason Bishop Gainza, again, was the one responsible for promoting vigorously the devotion to the Peña Francia celebration. The San Francisco Church, of course, another major church. You have to remember that that Bicol was part of the Franciscan missions, and as such, we are one of the first places in the Bicol in the Philippines which had been placed under the Franciscans. And one thing quite fortunate for us, the Franciscans were very, very much as an assiduous record keeper. So if you are going to consider the legacy of the Franciscans, when I was doing my dissertation in Spain, I spent about 10 times visiting the archives of the Franciscans in Madrid. And the archivero there was telling me that much of the documents that they got there came from Naga. During the last part of the revolution, the Franciscan friars who escaped Nueva Cáceres were carrying at least seven sacks of documents. Imagine carrying as they were escaping. They were carrying 7 sacks of documents and brought them to Spain. And that's where we have now much of the documents in Spain. So one of the most intact records in the Philippines were on the Bicol region because the Franciscans carried them back to Spain. Okay, very important church in Bicol. Okay. Of course, I was telling you, Center of Learning, Escuela de Maestras, or the Escuela Normal de Primera Enseñanza. You have the Correo de Santa Isabel. If you notice at the back of Correo de Santa Isabel, it was still forested. In fact, Gainza was saying when they started clearing the area to build the Correo de Santa Isabel, it was referred to in Bicol as Kadlagan, meaning to say a forested territory. Okay? So now you have this the seminary of Cáceres. Can we go to the other? Naga, again, even in the late 19th century, Naga remains a major colonial settlement. So it gave you an idea of the first Casa Real. Casa Real is the provincial capital. It's located where you have Pure Gold now, the commercial establishment of Pure Gold. It used to be the place where the Casa Real stood. So the Casa Real, Almacen, and then the Plaza Principal de la Ciudad. So you have the Plaza Rizal at the bottom part. Yan ang Plaza Rizal. Okay? So the other part there is you have the Plaza Kiosco. There was a quarrel at the time between the province and the city government. But in reality, it was not owned by neither of the city and of the province at the time. It was owned originally by a private family, a wealthy family here in Bicol. Okay. So, give you an idea again here, a beautiful design already of the city of Cáceres. You have Plaza Rizal. It was originally called Plaza Alfonso XIII. Then you have the provincial capital there, the upper part there. Then you have the Casa de Escribanos. I suspect the Casa de Escribanos is the councilor's office, the office of the municipal councilors. So you have the Sangguniang Bayan, Sangguniang Panlunsod ng Naga could have been located in this Casa de Escribanos. Then you have here the road going down there is going to the Panganiban Street. Okay, so you have so basically that's how it looked like. Okay? So iyan ang Plaza Rizal, ang sentro. As I said, it was originally called Plaza Alfonso XIII. Itong other side, yun ang Plaza Kiosco ngunyan. So that is called the Calle de Santa Cruz because that is where the town of Santa Cruz began, which is now only a barrio or as a barangay. So, okay. Okay. During the American era, Nueva Cáceres remained an important seat of governance because it became the seat of the provincial capital during the American regime. And by 1918, ambos Camarines was divided into two. It became now Camarines Norte and Camarines Sur. So to highlight this division, they put up the monument Abu Rizal and the 15 Martires on this particular year. So by the time we ceased to be na ambos Camarines. Ambos in Spanish means both Camarines. So by 1918, there was a separation of the two Camarines into Norte and Sur. And so they put in 1910, this was a 1910 newspaper, American newspaper, you have the elegant design of the provincial capital, where, as I said, the pure gold now stands. Now, we go to the component municipalities or member municipalities of Metro Naga. You have Bula. Bula, for most of us, seem to be an insignificant town today because it's located at the margins of the, you might say, activity, di ba? Nasa gilid na siya. But originally, Bula was an important town. Why? Because all passengers going to Camarines to Albay would pass through Bula because of the Bicol River. Only Bula lost its importance and its economic, you might say, livelihood by the middle of the 1850s. So again, as I said, it's a lesson from history for urban planners. Not only because you put a road and you always consider that as development. There is always a downside for any development. Okay. Take, for example, the case, as I said, of the development in 1840s. When they opened a Carretera del Sur, a Carretera del Sur is the south road from Nueva Cáceres until Albay. So they paved a road this time. Earlier on, people were traveling by the Bicol River. But by 1845, they opened a road. So what happens to Bula? It was marginalized. So Bula, Minalabak, Milaor suffered terribly as an effect of this change in the mode of transportation. So basically, that's the effect of the creation of the, and Bula suffered. But then, by the late 19th century, there is something that is important that happens in Bula. Certain family invested in Bula, known as the Fesed family. The Fesed were very, very influential. There were, I think, four brothers, Fesed. One of them was Jose Pesed. And the Pesed brothers, kung mga taga-Bula ka mo, yan ang nagpayaman sa Bula kan late 19th century. In some respect, nagpayaman because it generated a certain kind of an income on the people. He created an industrial estate. So distillation of ilang-ilang, and it was producing, I think, 300 kilos of ilang-ilang. They were distilling them into perfume and would send them to Europe for as an export item of the Bicol region. Pero, and imagine, it encompassed 673 hectares. Imagine kung ang estate mo araw kang kahiwas, covering much of the towns in that Partido area, in that Partido and Rinconada area. So, araw kang pero what makes it, we said, important in the history of Bula is this. One of the brothers of the Pesed is one of the persons whom Rizal hated most in his life. Pablo Pesed, if you probably studying a Rizal course, Pablo Pesed is known in history as Q-Cap. Kiukiap is the, you would say, hated most by the Filipino nationalists, not only by Rizal, but if you look at the readings of Rizal, the writings of Rizal, Graciano Lopez Haina, and all the other nationalists, one of the persons that they would always mention is Pablo Pised. And Pised, imagine, not one in Philippine history knew this. Pised was actually residing, the brothers of Pised were residing actually in Bulac. See? Quite an interesting feature in our history that the one of the persons that Rizal hated most was a resident in a way of Bulacan. Now we go to Bumbon. Of course, I'm not dwelling on this because I'm not an archaeologist, but there was, of course, an ongoing archaeological work in Bumbon, which actually uncovered a lot of interesting artifacts going as far as about 1,000 years ago. So indicating that there were already not only habitations in Bumbon, but there was apparently a flourishing civilization in Bumbon that that period. Okay? But of course, the most important attraction in Bourbon was the Leaning Tower, built in 1820. It's quite interesting. The saga of this construction was interesting. Constructed in 1820. Uh, but after a while, nakaabot na sa duwang layer si Belfry, 12 meters. So that means to say about 36 feet ang langkaw na. Ang daga, apparently, it was soft and it sank and it tilted. And so the people were at a quandary whether to continue the construction or to abandon it. But they realized that abandoning it and rebuilding another would entail a lot of expenses and a lot of time and a lot of labor. So they said, okay, let's proceed. And so they proceeded without knowing that eventually, when they decided to finish the tower, unknowingly, they were leaving a touristic and historic legacy for the future. So some of the, you might say, unexpected turn of positive events in their history. Okay. Let's now go to the other. Okay, that's it. Can we now go to the next? Calabanga, of course, San Miguel, Calabanga. Sa major seaport. Although historically, Calabanga is dwarfed by a more, you might say, it's simply a barrio now, Kipayo. Because for a long time, Calabanga was a barrio of Kipayo. But Kipayo was a major, you might say, Spanish mission because there were four Franciscan missions in the Bicol region. Kipayo, Naga, Nabua, and Libon. The Franciscans, when they introduced what they call the process of reducción, the process of reducir in Spanish is not to reduce, to smaller, not reducir in Spanish means to rearrange. Ducere in Latin is to lead away from, so to reorganize the settlement. And one of the things that they did is to divide the Bicol River into four major mission outposts, and Kipayo was among them. And so later on, Kipayo was eclipsed by the prominence of Calabanga because Calabanga is a seaport. And so all travelers from Camarines Norte would drop by Calabanga and enter through San Miguel Bay and eventually enter through the Bicol River. So Calabanga rose to prominence economically because of this. And of course, so when the Philippine-American War broke out, ang inatake kan mga Amerikano ang Calabanga because it's a port of entry to Nueva Cáceres. So one of the earliest battles in the Philippine-American War in Bicol happened in Calabanga. So on February 20, 1900s, there was a major battle there that happened. And of course, another important contribution of Calabanga is one of the few towns I know, and probably the only town, that built a memorial to the Filipino teachers, a monument that they had in Calabanga, which honored and paid tribute to the Filipino teachers. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is the head of the invading American forces, Colonel James Parker, and that is the USS Marietta, one of the ships that docked in Calabanga, where the American forces disembarked eventually to invade Nueva Cáceres. So once they passed through Calabanga, they opened the gate for the invasion of Nueva Cáceres and the rest of the Bicol region. But the people in Calabanga and of course the revolutionary forces of Arejola and Guevara made stubborn resistance. So there were a number of casualties in the Battle of Calabanga Port, so if you might call it that way. Yeah. Of course, the monument in Calabanga. It's a post-war monument, I suspect. Can we go now to the next, please? Okay, this is a narrative. It was telling us what happened when Calabanga uh, Battle of Calabanga took place. So can we now proceed, please? Yeah, thank you. Kamaligan. So Kamaligan is one of the riverine towns which showed early signs of Hispanic presence. Again, because of an archaeological work being undertaken today and by local, not necessarily professional archaeologists, but they were gradually digging up a lot of artifacts. I was a young boy already in 1970, and I learned of the pot hunters digging up a lot of archaeological artifacts in the area of Kamaligan. So we know that Kamaligan is an ancient settlement. It was also as a staging point. Historically, Kamaligan was a staging point for the composite guerrilla units' assault on Naga during the battle for liberation. So historically, Kamaligan played an important role in the liberation of Naga. Duman nag-assemble ang gabos ng mga guerrillas, Tangkong Baka, Camp Isarog, and all the other guerrillas in Camarines Sur when they raided Naga. So from Kamaligan, they entered the back of Ateneo de Naga, and the battle erupted in in Ateneo. Okay? So can we now proceed again to the next one? So this is a souvenir picture of the guerrilla after they liberated Naga in April of 1945. So if you look at it, yaon sinda naman sa Plaza Rizal. Okay? So nag-post sinda. Ayan, may bigoting yan na puti-puti, maput may bigoting yan na halabaw ng bigoting yan. That was Major Russell Barros. Russell Barros is an important personality in the guerrilla operations here. He was not a professional soldier. He was, I think, a mining engineer. But then he was left during when the war broke out. He was not able to escape to U.S. and he stayed here in Bicol. And so he was given by Colonel Russell a certain kind of a position to organize guerrilla forces. And so he was an important personality. Kataid ni kaniyong nakaparabas na iniyo si Juan Q. Miranda. Ito may puti na cap. And so very important photograph of the American of the liberation in Naga in 1945. May harong dyan sa Kamaligan na probably if you still exist and you are from Kamaligan, I think you should pay tribute to that house. Yan house ni Andres Diez. Yan sa lumang-lumang building na sabi ni Major Juan K. Miranda when I was interviewing him, it was in that area where they planned the liberation of Naga. So where they would enter, what would they do, and so very important, and it was owned by the mayor at the time of Kamaligan, Mayor Andres Diez. Kanaman, of course, one of the early missions, Franciscan missions, and used to be a barrio of Naga. It was founded in 1583, together with Bula and other municipalities here. Okay? It was renowned for a religio-cultural festival known as Lagaylay. If you study Lagaylay, it's actually reflective of a pre-colonial practice, the adoration of the moon. So there was a pre-Hispanic ritual. They adored the moon, and it was eventually integrated into the Catholic ritual, which became a religious Catholic ceremony known as the Lagaylay. It was also the birthplace of the Tangkong Baka guerrilla unit. The reason is because the commanding officer, Juan Q. Miranda, was actually from San Nicolas, Canacman. So it was there where he founded the Tangkong Baka guerrilla movement. Can you go to the next slide? So this Miranda, that's the seal of the Tangkong Baka guerrilla unit. So, because the Church of Kanaaman, built in 1595. That was the belfry. I suspect based because I am very much interested with this because I came from the town and did when the first time I went to the Archivo Franciscano Ibero Oriental, one of the places I immediately look at the records was in Kanaaman. So I get substantial documents. It was built in 1590s. That's one thing for sure. So kaya lumang-luma na, and it's almost collapsing. But later on, I was able to talk to the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and so we installed a marker a year ago to honor the historic role of Kanakman in the development of Bicol history. Can we go? So we have Gainsa. Gainsa, of course, is named in honor of Bishop Francisco Gainsa, but it's a small town and apparently quite at the margins of history, except for one thing. Of course, if you are doing a cultural mapping, you would always mention of the three Santo Entierros. But then, one important role of Gainsa is it became a terminus, the end of a certain kind of a river, which they were constructing in the 1620s. The bishop at the time of Cáceres realized that he saw the burden of the Bicolanos because they were conscripted to do a portering job. Uh, Most of the towns he would contribute porters, cargo carriers, whenever a galleon would arrive in Pasacao. So they would carry the cargo of the passengers from Pasacao until Nueva Cáceres. And one of the report mentions there, sabi niya, ang pigdadarada nindang cargo grabing baray ang gabat, pero ang laboy da dyan sa inaagyan ninda abot tigdiyo sa kabayan ninda. So it's a terrible ordeal. Imagine walking from Pasacao until. So I think the bishop took pity on these people who were doing what they call polo e servicio. So they decided to dig up a certain kind of a canal from Pasacao, but it was never finished because the one who was contracting the canal realized that it's not a successful, profitable enterprise, so he gave it up. And apparently, the workers there were Chinese at the time. Those works which Filipinos did not want to do, the Chinese would do it. Today, it's reverse. Whenever Chinese did not like to do that job, the Filipinos would take it. So the irony of history. At the time, Gainsao, it's a back-breaking job, building a canal. So they said, okay, we will no longer finish that. So it was not finished. So if you go to Gainsao, you will notice there is a certain river there. It used to be connected to Pasacao, but it was never completed. And there were several attempts in the 18th century, and finally in the 19th century, Gainsa tried to do it, but he also failed to finish. Magarao. What you probably be surprised that the first leprosarium in Bicol was in Magarao, okay? Sa may Punong. If you're from Punong, there's a certain, they call it the Casa de los Arenos. Casa de los Arenos, the house of the lepers. It's a makeshift building made of bamboo and nipa. But later on, they have to relocate the Casa de los Arenos. The reason is this. The residents of the nearby barrios in Canacman and Magara were complaining to the colonial government. They said, ini nga yung mga leper, nagpapararigo sa Bicol River. On the other side, nagkukuro sila ng tubig, pang-inom, kuminsan, pangkaag nila sa maluto ninda. Imagine. So they decided, okay, let's give that up. So for that reason, they eventually transferred it somewhere else. And where was that? In Pili. So you have the leper colony in Leprosarium in Pili. Of course, one thing that makes Magarao unique is the fact that unlike other towns in Camarines Sur, which fought strongly against the Americans, it's only Magarao who fought for the Americans. So the other towns were fighting them, but then the Magarao were very, very friendly with the Americans. And that's one evidence of that is they put a barrio there in honor of an American general, the Barrio Bell. Bell is named after, not a bell, but it's named after Major General James Bell. So because they were very, very friendly with the Americans. And they were, so all the other towns were ganging up on Magarao. So when the Americans succeeded, one of the towns that they immediately developed was Magarao as a payment of gratitude to the loyalty of the people of Magarao. So that's a little highlights on Magarao. Milaor. Again, today, Milaor is known as the town where it is frequently flooded. And probably not, today, it's now a rising municipality economically because of the construction of many commercial establishments there. But earlier on, 100 years ago, Magara was a very, very poor town. Again, a victim of the shift in the mode of transportation. Originally, Magarao was a very, very rich town. The early years of the Spanish regime, Magarao, because I got a lot of the demographic records. If you're a historian, one of the things that you would be interested to look into would be demographics or population records. And in Spain, in Seville, we have very, very preserved documents on the populations. You will be surprised. And most of the towns, going back to 1700s, the population were preserved. The number of women, the number of men, the number of Spaniards, the number of Agta, the numbers of those who were going to school. Very, very interesting information. And there, Milaor was one of the most populated town. But then after 1860s, when the road was constructed connecting Naga to Albay, it went down. Milaor, Minalabak, Bula, the population suffered. So was its economy. So were their economy. Okay. So that's one thing. And of course, the other feature of the Milaor would be the leaning power of Milaor. Milaor was also a town that one of the reasons apparently in the early years, it was the church and the town of Milaor was destroyed. It was actually burned down. And if you're a historian, you will suspect why it was burned down. It was it's an accidental fire. But actually, the other records would say, apparently there was a deliberate attempt to destroy the town. See the irony in history. And the culprit will probably be the priors. The reason is because the priors wanted to transfer Milaor to the other side of the river. Because they said Milaor is frequently flooded, and if you go to the other side of the river, it's located on a higher plane. But there's another reason. The reason is because Milaor would play the role of a buffer against the remontados or cimarrones based in Pili. So if you transfer Milaor on the other side, then it will protect Nueva Cáceres from the intrusion of the remontados or the cimarrones. Kaya yan sinangyari. So entire towns, but the people resisted. No, stay here, you stay here. So they stayed there. And that's where Milaor thrived in history. Nilabak is another interesting town, of course, another victim of the 1850-1845 transfer of the navigational highway. It's the renowned home among the people of Minalabak. You probably know of the Kulakog. Si Kulakog is an interesting personality, and if you are doing some kind of a symptomatic analysis of the culture of the can you pay attention for a while, please? Can you pay attention? Medyo nadidistract ako. So, sorry. I'm a good speaker, but once I get distracted, and sorry, I have some difficulty pursuing the thread of my thoughts. Okay? I can speak for hours and hours and hours. Okay? So, but then minsan pag I can no longer contain. So, renowned as a Kulako is an interesting personality. Okay? It's a legendary personality, but it reflects the kind of people and the kind of how we look at the world. Because Kulakog is depicted as a guy with a very, very large penis. And among the legends sa Minalabak, they say na at one time daw, when the Moros raided Minalabak, si ina ni Kulakog was on the other side and was apparently going to be caught by the Moros. So what Kulakog did is to extend his penis. on the other side of the river, and the mother was able to walk on the pennies and was able to go on the other side. Well, it sounds very, very vulgar, but then, or bastos, but then the ancient Bicolans didn't have that notion. The word, by the way, the word bastos is not connected with any moral sense, the way we understand it today. Bastos in Spanish means simply coarse. So they generally refer to the word bastos to a kind of an abaca, ginaras, which is coarse, and therefore they call that bastos. Today we apply bastos when somebody has a personality which is quite coarse. So basically that's it. But the ancient Filipinos didn't have a notion of that, of anything sexual as bastos. In fact, they look at sex as something very, very positive. Okay? So it's only when Christianity came into the scene that anything sexual became somewhat associated with evil. Okay, so but therefore the idea of kulakog opens a kind of a vista for reinterpreting our culture as Filipinos, as Bicolanos. And I think important si kulakog na i-re-examine yan. Kung mga estudyante yung nag-aaral ng literature or philosophy or indigenous culture, importante i-examine them because it was already overwhelmed by Catholic ideas, Catholic concepts. And it's all another important aspect of Minalabak is it became the general headquarters of the Filipino forces under General Ludovico Arejola during the Filipino-American War. Yan talaga ang naging headquarters, campo ni General Arejola. And people became the rallying point of resistance among the Bicolanos during the battle of the Philippine-American War. And not so much known among Bicolanos is there was a harrowing ordeal suffered by the Spaniards. I got the sort of a diary of a Spaniard who survived the massacre. They were massacred in Minalabak ironically, by a school teacher. He was a school teacher, but when the revolution erupted, he was promoted to the rank of a lieutenant. And he was the one leading these troops, leading his troops as they were carrying these prisoners because after when the American forces were landing in Calabanga, they pulled out all the Spaniards in Nueva Cáceres and brought them somewhere else. And while they were passing through Minalabak, they decided to massacre them. So they struck bolos on this Guardia Civil, and many of them died in Minalabak. But then, what happened to the guy who orchestrated the massacre? When the Americans came, ironically, he was executed because of his war crime. And among the crimes he committed was the massacre of these hapless Spaniards. Okay? So George Curry, a very interesting American officer, and Ludovico Arejola, they were both commanding officers of the warring forces. Arejola was the commanding force of the revolutionary forces. Curry was the commanding officer of the American forces. That's quite interesting. But if you go over the anecdotes of Curry, because Curry left a certain kind of a memoir, very interesting memoir. When Governor Villaforte was still a governor here, he was looking for information on Curry, and I told him, you should buy this book published in the United States because it was a memoir of Curry. And one of the anecdote there which is quite touching is this. When Curry was captured by the Filipino forces, Arejola entertained Curry, imagine, and gave Curry all this food, all the attention. And so later on, when Arejola was also captured, it was Curry who was interceding in behalf of Arejola. So imagine a very, very friendly atmosphere, even in the midst of war. Quite interesting saga. Ocampo was one of the earliest Franciscan missions in Mount Isaro. So you have to understand that the Franciscans concentrated on the lowland territory, but later on eventually proceeded to the upper portion of the Bicol region. So what the second phase of the evangelization. The first phase was in 1578, and it evangelized all the lowland towns. But by the 1600s, eventually they proceeded to the upper part of the Bicol region. Why? Because by 1609, there was massive migration from the lowland to the upland territories. Mount Isarog was populated by lowlanders. Why? Because of forced labor. The Filipinos at the time were required to work in the galleon, constructing ships in Bagatao Island, in Sorsogon, or in Pasacao, in Dalupao, Pasacao. And if you reach the age of 16 until 60, you are required to render 45 days of labor. And then, originally, the forced labor was not actually as bad as we always taught it in school. Originally, the forced labor was simply being used only for developmental purposes. Meaning to say, you construct bridge, you construct municipal buildings, churches, and the Spanish government would say, who will benefit out of that? Not us, you Filipinos. So it's valid. But then, by 1609, when the Spano-Dutch War erupted, they started using forced labor for military purposes. Maging bantay sa mga baluartes, mag-construct ng baluartes, mag-construct ng mga warships, and it became very, very bad. Many were dying. I got a document in 1619 about the towns here in Bicol region. Most of them went down in terms of population because they went up to the hills. They escaped the lowlands. And the Spaniards were worried, especially the friars, because there were no more parishioners. They would relapse their pre-colonial religion. So they decided to encourage them to go back. And so the second reduction or the second conversion happened among the towns, Pili and Ocampo, where they became the base for the conversion of the upland missions. Can we go? So, drawing na yan ni Fyodor Yagor. Ano yan ang itsura kan mga akta in some way. Sorry. Isa drawing in 1859, 1860 by Fyodor Yagor. So, Isarog, Igorote of Isarog. By the way, the people in Mount Isarog were not all Agta, as people thought. Actually, the Agta in Mount Isarog were minority. Ang larger concentration ka Agta was in Ocampo. That's why they created a certain kind of a community there in Pinit. But still, don't think that if you are from Ocampo, you are actually Agta. No. Agta still remains to be a small minority in the population. Ocampo is populated more by migrants from outside Camarines Sur. Because of the promise of land there, still undeveloped, and because of the abaca boom. You know, when the abaca industry boomed, abaca is not is an industry which required large acreage plantation. So they required land areas, big land, and Ocampo was among the most appropriate place to plant abaca. So, yan, nag-good piece population yan, mga migrants. And we now go to the next. Pamplona, named of course from after the province of Pamplona in Spain. Apparently, according to legend, because there was a Spaniard there who came from Pamplona and he missed the province, so it was named Nuevo Pamplona or New Pamplona. But we don't really know how exact was that. But one thing we know is there was a canal, just like that of Gainsa. They started to create a canal in that area until Gainsa. But as I said, it did not prosper. So they have to give up the construction from Pasacao to that area. But one thing important in Pamplona is it was the site of a historic battle of Tagilid Pass. For those who are not familiar with World War II event, this was a major event in Bicol history. Why? According to estimates, there were about 270 Japanese soldiers who were ambushed by about 70 poorly armed guerrillas. Okay, so it happened in a certain hill known as Tagilid Pass. And one of the casualties there was the commanding officer of Ateneo de Naga garrison, Colonel Ichisaburo Takichi. And definitely was confirmed dead. He was buried on yung guardhouse kang Ateneo de Naga, yan si tomb ni Colonel Takichi. And the one who mentioned this to me was Major Juan Q. Miranda, because when Juan Miranda surrendered to the Japanese during the pacification campaign, why did he surrender? His mother was hostage by the Japanese in Pamplona. His mother was tied in the railroad right in that noontime. He would be exposed there so that Miranda would surrender. So he could no longer bear this. He decided to surrender to the Japanese. And there was a pacification. There was a certain kind of a negotiation. And he was brought to Ateneo de Naga, And when he passed by the guardhouse, sabi kan siya po, you salute that the area there because that is where our commanding officer was killed by you during the Battle of Taguig Pass. So the battle was a major event. And another casualty was actually, it became a major issue, not only in Bicol, but in Philippine history. One of the major casualties there was a certain colonel or a certain general. Supposedly, among the guerrillas, they call him Tanaka, at Takano, some would say Tanaka. There was apparently no Takano, but probably it was Tanaka. Tanaka was a major blow to the Japanese forces had he died in the Battle of Taguig Pass. Tanaka was the field marshal of the Japanese Imperial Army in the Philippines, some high-ranking officer. When I asked my friend, who was an expert on the Japanese history, he just gave a talk last month. It was Dr. Rico Jose, one of the experts in Asia on the Japanese period. I told him, was there really a Tanaka who died? He said, oh, well, Tanaka, after October, after the Battle of Taguig Pass, disappeared in Philippine history and only returned after about 6 months. So could it be possible that he recuperated? He was among the casualties and recuperated and returned to the Philippines. So meaning to say, this was a major event, the Battle of Taguig Pass, which we probably have not located in our annals of history. Okay? This plan. So parok yan, tinampo yan, yan ang duwang bukid-bukid, yan duwang side na yan. Again, another lesson. Unfortunately, people there were not very familiar with the historic role of this mountain. Big quarry ninda yan. So mayo na, si duwang mountain na yan. That's supposed to be a very, very important landmark in our history. Bako lang sa Pamplona kundi sa Bicol because a major battle in World War II was fought in this. And imagine, 17 poorly armed guerrillas staged an ambush, an instant ambush, and killed virtually, they said, estimate is from 50 to 100 Japanese out of 270. It's a major development. Okay. Of course, go to the town of Pasacao. Pasacao is a major historic spot among the Bicolanos. Why? Because it was a major shipyard in not only in Bicol but in the Philippines. There were only very few shipyards in the Philippines in the early Spanish regime, and among them was the shipyard in Dalupaon in Pasacao. It was a shipyard, and two of the major ships constructed in Pasacao were Angel de la Guardia and Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe. Si Governor Villafuerte was so elated with this information, kaya nga at one time, nagkaigwang parade sa Manila, nagpagibo siya ng duwang ships, si Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe and Angel de la Guardia. And they were built in Pasacao. And what made them important is these two galleons actually fought in the Battle of Lanabal. And among the leading ships in the Battle of Lanabal were these two. Of course, the Battle of Lanabal was considered a miracle in naval history because of the fact that the Spaniards were unprepared for a large number of Dutch armada who invaded the Philippines. And out of these few ships that we have, they were able to rout the Dutch. And so we now have the Nuestra Senora de Lanabal, supposedly because of the miracle through the intercession of Mary. And two of the ships there, as I said, came from Pasacao. This is a galleon. We got that from Museo Naval. We are doing research on the galleon, on shipyards, ships in the 19th century. The place you should visit in Spain would be Museo Naval. So many interesting documents on the history of navigation. And one of them is a print. So, yan ang Port of Pasacao. So, araw kayong itsura kan Pasacao. Imagine, 19th century, iguana silang strukturang araw kayo. Late 19th century. Because of the importance of Pasacao in navigation. Okay? Can we now proceed? Okay. Because there was a port, there was a shipyard, they had to have baluartes, watchtowers, because ang favorite na destination kan mga Moro kung yaon sa inang port. Because wherever there is port, there is naval power. Okay? So if you want to paralyze Spain, you have to destroy the naval power. And that's the reason why taktika kan mga Spaniards when Manila, of course, Manila is the center of the Spanish power in the Philippines. They did not build shipyards nearby Manila. Why? Because, Garubaga, you put your eggs in one basket. So when it is raided by the Dutch, raided by the Moros, you destroyed everything. So they decided to locate that somewhere else. Bicol is the most appropriate place. So you have Bagatao Island in Sorsogon, you have Dalupaon in Pasacao, you have also a shipyard in Catanduanes, in Masbate, in Libon. One of the most shipyard favorite area of Spain was Bicol region. And as I said, because of that, it was also frequently attacked by Moros, by the British, by the Dutch. So they have to put baluartes. Calabanga also had a baluarte, Cabusao had a baluarte, and Pasacao had a baluarte. because they have to protect these territories. And also, the other importance of Pasacao was because it was the site where the first Daughters of Charity landed in the annals of education of the Bicol region. By the way, the first normal school in the Philippines was not actually in Manila, but it was in Naga. So Manila, the Daughters of Charity opened a certain school in Manila, but it was only, I think, 9 years later than the Colegio de Santa Isabel in Naga. They opened their Colegio de Santa Potenciana, but then it was a different one from what we have here today. And it's a different religious order. Thank you very much. So let's go to the end. So it was describing how they landed in Pasacao during that historic moment in April of 1868. Pili. Pili celebrates the Cimarrones Festival. I was the one who introduced that idea of celebrating Cimarrones Festival because it was the heartland of the Cimarrones, as I was telling you. So you have to understand, as I said, that one of the reasons why the Franciscan friars apparently wanted to transfer Milaor was to make Pili the other side of Milaor as the buffer against Pili, the incursions of Cimarrones based in Pili. So, kaya, it was also the site of the first agricultural school in the region. So you probably know of the Sibisua. The relocation and site of the first leper colony in the region from Punong Magarao, dyan siya pigdara sa Pili. By the way, word pili does not mean pili. Contrary to popular belief, again, na pili ngay hali ngay sa plant. No, pili comes from the Bicol word napili. I know that from the document. It's not from my own opinion. Based on the document written by the Franciscans, they said that the natives decided to choose the place where they would put up a community. And they napili ang settlement sa Pili. And that's why we have Pili. Does not have anything to do with the Pili plant. Pili, by the way, the Pili plant is associated most in Sorsogon. There's not a Camarines Sur product. It's a misconception. As early as the middle of the 18th century, Pili was already mentioned by the documents that they were thriving in Sorsogon, not in Camarines Sur. Okay, so, yan ang remnant kang struktura sa Palestina, where you have the leper colony. Okay? The Hospital Diocesana de Lazarenos de Palestina, constructed in 1869 as part of the projects of Bishop Gainza and under the supervision of the Franciscan Fray Silvestre Alonso. So it's an interesting piece of our history, the leper colony. Really. Okay, so pre-war picture of the Camarines Sur agricultural school. Earlier on, it was called Agricultura. Of course, you don't call it Sibisua today. Okay? 1918. Now we go to San Fernando, the last town we have. Quite unfortunate, we do not have much information on San Fernando. Why? Because it was quite fairly recent town, although not necessarily recent, 1813, somewhat like that. But what made it quite unfortunate historically is because it does not occupy a major place in the regional history because it was at the margins of all movements in Bicol. Remember, originally, ang agihan ka ito sa Bicol River. Arayo siya. Paabot naman sa paabot naman sa Tinampo, late lang nagkaigwa kita ng Tinampo pasiring Manila. Originally, people traveled to Balungay in order to go to Manila. And they go travel to Cabusao in order to go to Manila, but not to what we now know today as San Fernando, Pamplona area. So it became a product of you may say, a victim of certain kind of a developmental malaise because of this. Kaya San Fernando remained in the shadow of our history until probably later on, probably we'll discover more. But definitely, you can hardly find materials on San Fernando's as occupying a significant place in our history. Okay. I think that's the last. And finally, I was able. Unfortunately, I missed Litmana because I thought it was not part of this Metro Naga development. So one of the important features of Litmana would be Kulapnitan Cave. And Kulapnitan Cave, most of young people here are no longer familiar with it, but it was featured by many, many foreigners who were coming to Bicol in the middle of the 19th century. Among them, Alfred Marsh, a certain French writer and historian, and of course, the eminent German scientist, Fyodor Yagor. Yagor provided a very, very extensive discussion on the culture of the people as they deal with Kulapnitan, because they said Kulapnitan Cave is the house of Lord Kulapnit, the god of the bats. So it was supposedly one of the gods of pre-colonial Bicol. So they were afraid to get into it. Alfred Marx was giving a story and said they were afraid to get inside the cave because they are afraid that they would be harmed by the god Kulapnit. So basically, that's the story of Lidman. And another thing is, it became a general headquarters of Tangkong Baka guerrilla unit. Contrary to popular belief, it was not the Tangkong Baka was not actually founded. Let me be clear about this. Based on there were a lot of I got a declassified documents from the, of course, U.S. Archive, U.S. Army, which were declassified lately, and about the guerrilla resistance movement in the entire Philippines. Some of them was, of course, the Tangkong Baka guerrilla, and of course from the records of Major Juan Kimiranda. It's not actually, Tangkong Baka was not founded in Libmanan. It was founded in Canacman. But then, eventually, Libmanan played a crucial role in the history of the Tangkong Baka guerrilla because of the fact that it was there where throughout the war, the guerrillas made their major camp. So, the reason, ang Canacman is a lowland. So, you cannot defend your position there if you are in a lowland. Even Japanese attack you, you are gone. So, they decided to go to Libmanan because there were mountains in Libmanan, which of course would make it quite inaccessible to the Japanese if ever they are going to conduct a raid on the guerrilla. And for that reason, the guerrilla of Major Miranda prospered in one of the best guerrillas we ever had in the Bicol region. And so that's it. That's the Siruma, we do not have much data on Siruma yet. I have not. Most of the towns we had were products because I have to write a book on them. I was commissioned by the towns to write it, so I have to do a lot of extensive research on the archives. But Siruma did not have much data yet because one thing was, as I said, it was remotely located from the mainstream of commerce, social and political commerce. The only thing that we got there was because of the World War II in Bito Siroma, when the family of Governor Villaporte were killed in that battle there in May 3, 1942, as a consequence of the attack conducted by Camp Isarog in Naga. But then let me be clear about this thing, because I had the diary of the wife of the one who led the attack there. When they were there in Bito Siroma, a group of Japanese and the family of Villafuerte, they did not really know that they were there. They when they saw the Japanese were there, because it was nighttime, there was a gunfight. Okay? So apparently the family were among those killed in the battle, and so they were beheaded eventually because they realized it's going to be a trophy when they go back to Naga because they thought Naga was already liberated from the Japanese. But again, it was a tactical. Looking at it in the context of a larger history, it was a tactical error. The reason is because the Japanese were, there were only about 100 Japanese in Naga at the time. So the guerrillas thought, maya ng Hapon. So you kill them, liberation na. They failed to realize that the Japanese were concentrated in Central Luzon, Bataan, and Corregidor. So after 1 week that the Japanese learned that the garrison here was attacked by the guerrilla, they sent a massive force and fire rained on Naga because the Japanese brought with them the Japanese Air Force and bombed Naga and reduced Naga to ashes. That was a temporary victory for the resistance in Naga. But it was, of course, a tactical, looking at it in the context of military tactics, it was a tactical error on the part of the guerrillas. So among the guerrillas, it's a glorious moment. We liberated Naga. You won a battle, as one general, American general said, but you lost the war. Okay? Because it resulted a great suffering on the part of the Nagueños because the Japanese really pulverized Naga because of the Japanese Navy, Air Force that came here because out of their anger. So that ends our lecture here. Sorry.
Okay lang, mga questions. Okay, pwede na po. Ano na tayo? Q&A. Pwede na po. Open po ang microphones. May mga microphones po kita.
Sige po, allow me to facilitate the Q&A. The first one to ask question is Mr. Ramon Olaño, to be followed by Councilor Joe Perez.
Good morning, everybody. Sir Danny, I was of the impression that Naga town, was totally demolished by the American bombers. Now, I got this information from you now that the buildings in the town of Naga were bombed by the Japanese. So I had that false knowledge that way back in 1945, the Americans started to come in. They were bombing the entire center of Naga. So I would like to get a confirmation from you. Was it the Japanese who totally demolished Naga? Or, again, the bombers of the American forces also totally obliterated the city of the town of Naga?
Thank you very much, Panigmon. I think I exaggerated a bit the Japanese raid. Japanese definitely bombed Naga. They used incendiary bombs, so it caused a lot of fire. In fact, I have some photographs showing that area there at in front of UNC. That area there. Before there was no UNC then, but it was at the back of the provincial capital. Then it was actually reduced to ashes because of the 1942 incendiary bombing of the Japanese. But again, it was rehabilitated. Naga was able to rise up after that, and again by 1945, Tamas Padingon, it was again bombed by the American forces. The reason is because apparently the Americans were not updated on the status of the Japanese. So they just thought the Japanese were still present. But the Japanese had their own strategy. The Japanese, upon learning that the Americans had already landed in Leyte, they started dispersing their forces and put them into residential houses. Quite interesting strategy. That's the reason why Naga City knows about this. They recovered helmets in a particular area there in Berlin. Siguro you probably have heard that. The number of them. It was actually occupied by, I have the name of the Japanese officer there. It was a captain who occupied that house of the, uh, the family who owned Alatko, the Amen family. It used to be owned by the Amen family. And so when the war broke out, it was taken over by the Japanese. And apparently they stayed there because they used that as a cover against the possibility that they would be bombed by the Americans, knowing that, of course, the Americans identified Ateneo de Naga, Camarines Sur National High School, and even Colegio de Santa Isabel as major Japanese installations. In fact, yang atubang na yang kang parokya, kang cathedral, tubagang ano nga yan, ni yung restaurant, ni Kipasa. It used to be a communication center. The Japanese would deliver their letters and tracts of letters, and telephones were concentrated in that particular area. So, in fact, may mga ibang reports na nag-mention na may mga comfort women digdiyo sa Nagang dadara dyan sa rong lugar digdiyo. I think at the back sa may Pico Construct na yun, sa may Enrile, may area ngayon dyan. There were some intelligence reports mentioning about a truckload of women being hauled off to go to that particular area. Okay? So, yan pa di ang Naga was actually destroyed twice. Not apparently completely destroyed, as I probably exaggerate a bit, but it was selectively destroyed certain portions. That area there in Cathedral was only destroyed during the 1945 American bombs. So tama ito ba din in some way? I hope it clarifies the issue. But they were able to recover. My father had a small store in Naga in 1942. Was telling me that it was actually fire was raining in Naga because of these incendiary bombs. They survived. Katain niyang tindahan ni Boning's Trading ka ito. So sabi niya, yan, sadit na tindahan yung Pariusin. Si Boning takula. Sadit sa Piritin. Pero sabi niya, I was there when the Japanese dropped their bombs in 1940. Sir.
All right. Councilor Joe?
Good afternoon po. Good afternoon, Dan.
After Councilor.
It's very, your what you call this? Your lecture was indeed very interesting,
Thank you. Thank you.
especially with the narratives on the Spanish and the World War II eras. No? And I also learned, ngunya lang hapon, that the Japanese also bombed Naga, aside from the Americans, because all I had was all I have was a personal account of the bombing of Naga by the Americans. And he described it even in a book that you have written, The Birth and the Birth. There was a personal account of the bombing. No? And some people explained why the churches, the seminary, and the University of Nueva Cáceres were spared because of strict instructions from the American pilots to spare these institutions, except maybe for the Palacio de Arcebispo na talagang it was guarded down also. Anyway, my question is this. I am inclined to believe that San Francisco Church really was originally facing the Naga River. Pero I'm also wondering why the belfry that we still have now is facing the road. Among the lot which was supposed to be a cemetery. Totoo pong cemetery yan because when there was effort to, when there was a rehabilitation effort for the San Francisco Church na facing na the plaza, kadakol pong mga bones ang nakuha. And I'm wondering now why the belfry is on that side, when traditionally the belfry should be on the facade of the church. Ano ba tong belfry? Was this constructed during the Spanish times or lately na when the church is already facing the plaza or the street?
Thank you very much, Kagawad. Of course, I'm very grateful for Kagawad Joe for um, um, for working so much on our local history here in Naga. And anyway, the reason is because it's now facing this area because originally the San Francisco Church was a mission church. Again, another nuance in colonial history. A mission church means it is actually catering not to the Spanish community, but to the native community. And when we speak of the native community, we are referring to the Pueblecillo de Naga. Naga at the time was a town. It's not a barrio. It's not located where we are now. Naga was on the other side of the Bicol River. There are lots of documents here in the Franciscan archives describing Naga at the time. It's on the other side of the river. The Nueva Cáceres is the area from the supermarket until the San Francisco Church. That's the Nueva Cáceres. Originally, it was intended by the Spaniards to be an exclusive residential community of the Spaniards. But then there were only 100 Spaniards from 1580s until the 19th century. The Spanish community here did not thrive. Reason? There was no economic benefit here in this place. They would go to Manila because of the galleon trade. And that's where the major attraction for the Spanish community in the Philippines was the galleon trade. Not so much Manila, but because it's where there were the galleon dock. So they would go to Manila because that's the Spaniards were allowed to put in a cargo in the galleon if you have stayed here already for 10 years. By the way, contrary to popular belief in the galleon history, not every Spaniards are allowed to put a cargo in the galleon. Only if you have stayed here for 10 years. It's sort of a thankful gratitude of the Spain that you keep the Spanish community in the Philippines. So they were allowed to put in cargo in the galleon. So this is exclusively supposedly for the Spanish community. And the Franciscans were missionaries, meaning to say, therefore, they were catering to the non-converted natives. So they have to be positioned on the other side of the river. Why not go to the other side? Well, one precaution also, if you join the people there, they might eventually kill you. So they learn a lot of lessons for this. So they positioned the church, they located the church within the Spanish community, but positioned towards the native community. And in fact, in 1792, there was an Episcopal Visitation Report I photocopied in Seville. It mentioned that there was a certain bridge there. Sa Naga, abot dyan sa San Francisco Church. A bridge made of bamboo and coconuts. And it was actually elegantly covered with leaves so that people from Naga could go to San Francisco Church. So that's the reason where Councilor Joe nakaposition there. But later in this century, when there were no more distinction between a Spanish community and a native community, they now positioned it here because many natives are already residing in Naga. So it ceased to be a mission church. It became an ordinary church. The church originally for the Spaniards was the San Juan Evangelista. The Iglesia de San Juan Evangelista was supposed to be a church for the Spanish community. That's held by the seculars. So in Philippine history, there were two kinds of priests. Seculars, which actually performed a kind of regulatory practices, activities, nurturing the natives in their sacramental life because they are already Christians. Then there's another group of priests that are actually evangelizing. These are the missionaries and they are the Franciscans. So after a while, there is no need to evangelize them. They were already Christians, living a normal life, and there are no Spaniards who were actually needing special attention from a specialist in some way, Spanish language. So they eventually positioned the San Francisco Church at the present site. Yang hapot ni Councilor Joe, itong belfry, when could that be? It could have been later in the 19th century. middle of the 19th century or later in the 19th, because there were a lot of renovations there. In fact, by the 19th century, there was no more. You have to understand that the San Francisco Church was actually a complex. It's not actually a church only and a convent. There's actually a hospital there. There was a hospital. The San I forgot the name of the saint. They honored that. There was a hospital there within the compound. Kaya nga ni iyang area iyan from San Francisco until Colgante, the the land there was belonging to the Franciscans. It was a donation. Paring Mon was talking about this several days ago. It was a donation from a certain Spanish encomendero to support the hospital, of the operation of the hospital. It's a rancho. Yang area yan sa San Francisco, haywasan na yan, abot sa Colgante, it was donated by a Spanish encomendero to the Franciscans. But then, later on when they vacated, there was no actually proper transfer of who should own that particular territory. Pero yan ang, just to answer Councilor Joe's question, very interesting question. Yan ang reason kung ano later on, it was positioned at the present site with the belfry, which is not actually 16th century, but most likely 19th century belfry because of the repositioning of the church. I answered it.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Sir
you,
Danny.
thank you.
Questions po? Sir Paolo Susara of UNC.
Hi, Sir Danny Marina. Hapon po. My question is, you mentioned a while ago about 1700s or even earlier. Bicol region as a whole was a shipyard. So allow me, correct me if I'm wrong with my understanding about shipyard. Shipyard, my understanding, it's a place where the galleons were constructed. All right. So my question is, why Bicol? That's the first one. Kumbaga, you have mentioned for it to be safer to the Moors, to the Dutch. Why chose Bicol, considering that could be Laguna, Batangas, could be much more nearer? And connected to the question is, they've chosen Bicol for what? For one, is there a resources that could supply the construction of those galleons or ships? And connected to that, is there skilled individuals or locals, or who's doing it, or the locals or the Chinese? So those are my questions. Thank you so much, Sir Danny.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Very interesting question. The reason why we were studied with a lot of shipyards here in Bicol, as I said, one is the military strategy. You put up shipyards in Manila, and it was attacked by foreign enemies, and you destroy the whole naval power of Spain in the Philippines in Southeast Asia. The other reason is because most of the trees in southern Luzon were already exhausted. You have to remember that we have a shipyard in Cavite. And near that area, and also in some parts in Pampanga, they were cutting a lot of trees. So when they constructed a very interesting document, when they constructed the Santissima Trinidad, the Galleon Santissima Trinidad, is one of the largest galleons that ever sailed the Philippines. And it was constructed in Bagatao Island. Quite interesting. Bagatao was producing a lot of galleons. And it was constructed there. It was a big galleon. The average galleon at the time was about 60 feet. Yung area kang sarong galleon, ang hull ng galleon would be about 60 feet. And ang mga pinaka-longest na kang galleon, tirong kang galleon would be about mga 80. Pero ang Santissima Trinidad was about 150 feet and about 50 feet in width. So it's a big galleon. And it took them almost a year just to cut trees. Because why is it that they put a lot of this? I said, the trees already in southern Luzon were already exhausted. So one of the reasons is because we have a lot of good hardwood in Bicol. So they put in Pasacao, they put it in Bagatao Island in particularly. As I said, the Santissima Trinidad was constructed there. And we have very good hardwood there. What about the skilled worker? Well, most of our workers were engaged only in what they call corte de maderas. Corte de madera is cutting of trees. And it's the most frightening job in the forced labor institution. Kaya nga sabi ko sa inyo, by 1609, 1619, many migrated to Mount Isog because they don't want to be conscripted in the Corte de Madera in Bagatao Island. Why? You work for 1 year. You are only required to work for 45 days, but the cutting of trees alone, by the way, a galleon is constructed for an average of 3 years. Then 1 year is devoted to cutting of trees only. And many were dying. In fact, I got a document. A mother from Nabua was killing. Sabi niya, dahil ko napapasuso ng aking ko. Because he will grow up and he will just die in Bagatao. So, araw kayang kaharrowing ang ordeal. Kaya, so one thing, there was so much food in Bicol. We have a lot of laborers in Bicol. They were only cutters, but not experts. And Apot ni Paulo, do we have experts? The so-called obreros inteligentes, as they call it in the document. These are the master laborers, experts. They were actually imported from Spain or from Mexico. Many of them are Spaniards. So job were requiring skill because you have to understand that in Spain there was already a nautical school where they were already studying ship engineering and all these things, and they cannot be done by local workers. So that's the reason why we were chosen to become a major site for shipyards in the Philippines. In the Philippines, not only Bicol, but Philippines. And that explains why ang Naga is very, very important. Why? If you look at the map, Naga, as I said, all roads lead to Naga. If you have Pampagatao, you will go stop by Bagatao Island, move the mainland Sorsogon in Magallanes, and walk all the way to Manila. That's what they did in 1581. The Galleon San Martin, which brought to the Philippines the first Archbishop of the Philippines, Domingo de Salazar, and the first batch of Jesuits. The first batch of Jesuits landed in Sorsogon, and they have to walk all the way to Manila for 3 months. They made a stopover in Nueva Cáceres. Something. Because, it's an arduous task to go directly. Ang Naga is the Spanish community. Yes, so they stayed. You go to, if the galleon goes to Catanduanes, because there are 2 passages. Ito pala napot sa pang important yan, Pao, na reason. Because the Philippines, Nueva Casa, Bicol is actually the gate of all galleons to the Philippines. No galleons coming to the Philippines would ever pass through other places other than Bicol region. Either you go to San Bernardino Strait in Samar Sorsogon area, or you go to Catanduanes and you go all the way to Batanes. So, yan lang duwang passageway. So, if the galleon cannot penetrate San Bernardino because it's dark, there's a storm, and you cannot see the land there, they would probably mistake Catanduanes. Kaya itong panahon, when Mayon volcano or Bulusan were erupting, it's a joyous moment for the sailors because they have a guide. They say, it's Bulusan. It's already Albay. So they can already penetrate the San Bernardino Strait. And easier for them to go to Manila. Because if you go to San Bernardino Strait, you are already in the mainland. And imagine, after traveling for 4 months, the average travel time for galleons at that time were 4 months. So imagine you don't take a bath, you have very, very meager food, even the CR, when you go to your toilet, it's very, very difficult. Imagine you go to the toilet and everyone sees you because the toilet is at the end of the galleon without any cover. So if you are an archbishop, imagine right before the eyes of everyone there and you're defecating. It's a shameful event. So that's basically just the harsh reality of the galleon life. So they wanted as much as possible to end their journey. And the best way is to go to Sorsogon. But sometimes they cannot do that. So they have to go all the way to the northern part of the Philippines. It would take them another 3 weeks or another month to travel and then go down to Manila after almost a month. So it's the gateway for all galleons to the Philippines. And for that reason, Naga became an important destination of all galleon passengers. As I said, if you are from Sorsogon, you go to Naga. You make a stopover. If you are passing through Catanduanes, there's a port in Catanduanes, in Caramuan. They call it the Port Sisiran. It has been a port recorded in documents. They would travel from Catanduanes, ride in a boat, go to Sisiran, and from Sisiran, you walk all the way to Lagunoy, and from Lagunoy, you walk overland Mount Isarog for 5 hours. Imagine, there was a record at that 5 hours from Goa to Mount Isarog, and you reach Kibayo, and that's it. If you are a traveler of galleon, you go there. If not, the galleon can proceed to Kabusao. So the so-called Ensenada de Naga. The galleon would dock in Kabusao, walk all the way from Kabusao to Nueva Cáceres. If the galleon was able to penetrate Sorsogon, it would reach Pasacao, and if there are travelers who are distant, they're going to Naga, they would stop by Pasacao, walk through Pamplona, then Kamaligan, and off to Naga. So Naga is the place where all roads from the galleons lead to. Another important aspect of our galleon history. So yan po ang
Thank you, Sir Danny. Thank you, Sir Pau. We wish to acknowledge the presence of our City Vice Mayor, the Honorable Cecilia Veluz de Asis.
hi, Vice Mayor.
Sige po, may questions po kita?
Question.
Anthony from United Architects of the Philippines.
Sir, good afternoon
Hi,
po.
Anthony.
Since mabalik po ako sir sa Japanese occupation connected sa question number 1. Since nung college po kami is one of our projects is to locate historical values na located sa Bicol. Tapos meron po kaming discoveries na meron palang Japanese tunnels ang Mount Isarog. Tapos merong located sa CBSUA, Sakori, tunnels and foxholes na located sa Mount Isarog, pati po sa mga likod ng waterfalls, may Japanese tunnels. Ang tanong ko po sir is, naging successful po ba yung sir advance nilang paggawa ng tunnels nung bago bumalik yung mga Americans?
Thank you very much, Anthony. Yeah, quite interesting. Several years ago, I was interviewed by Cara David for a certain feature on the tunnels here in Bicol. So we went to Sibisua, and I brought her to the tunnels, showed her the tunnels. What were the tunnels for? The Japanese had a foresight. Apparently, they knew they won't last. So they started building a tunnel from that area there in Sibisua until Mount Isarog. In fact, I got some maps which showed that on top of Mount Isarog, in that area near Curry, there were actually, you'll be surprised, tunnels made for Japanese planes, Japanese zero planes. They were covering them with this, they were big hangar in a way. That area there, because the Japanese did not only have an airport in Pili, they paved that area there in Ocampo. Another important airport, the military airport in Camarines Sur was in Ocampo. In fact, there were accounts of residents coming from Iriga, Nabua, who were conscripted to work in this construction of the Japanese airport. If that is the case, then they must have defensive structures. And among them, these tunnels. They were not actually tunnels that we always thought that it's long distance protected area there, a massive area. No, it's actually short, small anti-aircraft tunnels. So, gaano kahiwas ang laba ang tunnels na yan? Mga 2 meters, 3 meters. So the Japanese were positioned there, covered with leaves probably. They have their anti-aircraft positioned to the American Air Force. So that's one thing. The Japanese were apparently aware that they won't last. So they made this way. Why Mount Isarog? Strategically, Mount Isarog is important. Why? Because they can travel to San Miguel Bay. They can travel to Lagunoy Gulf if ever there is a need for a naval evacuation. And that's quite evident in 1944. When I was going over the documents of the guerrilla forces, the guerrilla intelligence reported that in Peña Francia Avenue, all the residents there were required in August and September of 1944 to vacate their houses because the Japanese declared that as a war zone, meaning to say they would be occupied by the Japanese. And there's an interesting statistics. From out of about 100 Japanese in 1942, the Japanese presence in Naga rose to about 17,000. In the entire Bicol, it rose to about 42,000. What does that tell you if you are a historian? One thing, why deploy your forces to Bicol? One reason, I checked this with an expert, Dr. Rico say. One reason is this. The Japanese were unaware where the American forces were going to land. Would it be in the south? Would it be in the north? If ever it would land in the south, Bicol is the most strategic because there was a marine base in Bulan, Sorsogon. From Naga, there was a train. Of course, you know that the train was reopened its operation in 1942, not necessarily for commercial purposes, but to transport their troops. So from Naga, it could go to Albay, and from Albay, it could go to Sorsogon and transport their troops to Mindanao or to Visayas. If ever the Americans landed, because there was a suspicion that the Americans would land in Cagayan, they can immediately deploy their troops by train, go to Manila, then from Manila to the north, and therefore defend the positions. So Naga and Bicol became the most strategic area for as a staging point for the deployment of troops in Luzon or in the Visayas. And that's the reason why all these preparations for these tunnels apparently was intended because they have an inkling that apparently they won't sustain their rule in the Philippines.
Alright. Sige po. Siguro, Sir Danny, bago ko mahapot ng ibang question,
Apa.
mahapot din muna po ako kasi bago pinag-uurulayan din kaya ini because we are into mapping our
Yes.
structures in Naga as well as structures within Metro Naga. Saro tabi, Prof. Danny, na pigaharapot, sa inagahali ang mga materyales na ginagamit sa mga konstruksyon. We have seen a lot of structures sa pinailingan po. May mga simbahan, may mga government buildings. Pero in particular po, Naga, probably in Metro Naga, saan po nagahali ang mga materyales na ginagamit? Arog bakang ladrilyo, si mga gapo na ginagamit sa konstruksyon. Na samantala sa Naga, kung hilingon ta po digin sa kababaan o kamaligang ka naman, mayo man kita digding garo. I do not know if we have a quarry. So, saan po inipig ko atabi, Sir Danny, ka mga panahon?
Okay. Salamat, Len. That's a very interesting question. If you're from some towns, there are various in your towns that are called pabrika. Bula had a pabrika. Yeah, I don't know kung Kalabanga, pabrika, Kamaligan. I think there's also, but these are actually, that necessarily means it's an industrial factory. Fabrika is generally associated with hornuhan. Sometimes they called it the place also hornuhan because it's the place where they bake bricks, ladrillo. In fact, one of the earliest accounts of the brick-making activities in Bicol was written by Fray Juan Francisco de San Antonio. He published the book Crónica de las Historias, something of the Franciscans. So, a Franciscan chronicler in 1739 and 1740, something like that. And he mentioned of the manufacture of ladrillo here in Naga, in Camarines Sur. Sabi niya, the people here were taught by the Franciscans to produce ladrillo. Saan naghahali ang ladrillo? He said that it came from the clay from nearby part of the river, and they also get certain young shells. Shells were important ingredients of ladrillo. And they also make use of white yolk of the egg. So they were mixed together and they were producing ladrillo. That's how he described it in 1740s, that we were producing ladrillo. So that's one area. Ladrillo, if ever there are available clay, these are necessary for the production. If you happen to go to some churches, you will notice that there are ladrillo, and I have one, someone gave this to me. I think it was from Libon. In ladrillo, there are some names there. So you will be fascinated because some people apparently were required to produce ladrillo and they have to put some initials to show that these were their products, either for payment or for compliance to the Polo y Servicio. So very interesting. If you go, for example, to tobacco, the Church of Tobacco is not made of ladrillo. It was made of what they call silleria, hewn stone cut. And generally, it was taken from the sea, corals, because there were a lot of corals is near the sea, so they produced out of that. And if you look at some of the rocks in the Church of Tobacco, there were some inscriptions there. In fact, some names were actually inscribed on the rock, apparently to show, oh, this is my product. So I have to be paid because of this one. In places, as I said, where they are closer to the sea, they made use of corals as building blocks of the churches. A good example was in Cagsawa. Very interesting documents on Cagsawa. And there was a quarrel between Cagsawa and Legazpi, or Albay Viejo. The quarrel is this. The people of Cagsawa were not being allowed to get corals from Albaygor by the people of uh, uh, of Albay Viejo. Because they said, we own that. You cannot have that. But sabi kan mga taga-Cagsawa, we need that to build a church out of this. I do not know if the church that was built out of those corals was the church that we now have today that was already ruined by the eruption in 1814. But yan sarong na yan. Sa ibang lugar where they are farther from the sea and they are closer to mountains, they make their churches out of rocks, volcanic rocks. A good example, I think was Daraga. It's already upper part of the sea. They made use of volcanic rocks. So there are several materials, either volcanic rocks, they make use of corals, or they make ladrillo from the rivers.
Sige po, probably we'll entertain two more questions before we take a short break for the closing part of our program. May question to po? Question?
Any more questions?
Okay na? Ma'am Yoli, do you have a question po? Si Ma'am Yoli naghihilingan.
Yeah. Si Ma'am Yoli.
Ma'am Yoli.
Sir, good afternoon po.
Good afternoon.
Question ko lang po kasi ang history kang kamhay saro ka po sa pinaka nakatabang sa mo ma-establish mi si foundation. Tapos po ang nabanggitan mo man during Japanese period si nangyari sa kamhay. Ang gusto ko lang pong haputon, kung na-encounter mo po ang pangalan na Colonel Isabashi, kasi yan po ang pigsasabi ka mga alumni, na nagbase dyan, na kaipuhan nila magsaludo pag-agi duman sa main building, na yun na po si leader duman sa headquarters sa Kakamhay. How true po itong account na ito?
Colonel, ano tabi?
Colonel Isabashi.
Yeah. Yeah, Colonel Isabashi is...
Thank you po.
Thank you. Colonel Isabashi is very, very prominent in the World War II records. And I think he was, there were actually, contrary to popular belief that we only have one Japanese headquarters, Ateneo de Naga. That's not actually true. The Ateneo de Naga is more about, the one who gave me this information, ironically, you would not believe this, was a Japanese Kempitai, who was still alive in Naga until 1980. And he was carrying an assumed name. I think the name was Narciso. I forgot the surname. And somebody betrayed to me his identity, the family of the Cervantes, because they were actually Japanese. The Cervantes were Kitaguchi. and they have a small organization of Japanese and said, don't you know that there is a Japanese Kenpitai here? Japanese Kenpitai was assigned there sa may Kulgan building mo niya na, we call that Carmen Hotel? Is that Carmen Hotel? It used to be the headquarters of the Japanese Kenpitai, and he was the one in charge there of gathering, of interrogating prisoners and interrogating the guerrillas who were arrested by the, because nakulaon na headquarters yan, gilid na yan kang, yan kamo dyan sa Kulgante, and gilid na yan ang headquarters kang Japanese Kenpitai. Ang Kenpitai is a military police kang Japanese. So basically, yan ang scenario. Sabi kaniyang guerrillang iniyo na iba-iba talaga. Ang Ateneo de Naga was actually designed only for most of them for Japanese officials. Yang ibang mga garrisons were actually for other soldiers. For example, Kamhai is actually devoted to armored forces, engineering and armored troops of the Japanese. Kaya iyan lugar na iyan. Sabi na may mga kabayo, either mechanized or actually natural cavalry. Yan ang lugar na yan. So Isabashi, Yol is very, very prominent. I think I look at the records and see kung saan siya talaga assigned. But you have to understand that it depends on what time. Because the Japanese, they were not assigned permanently in a certain office. So they would be transferred for after several months or after a year, they would be transferred to another headquarters. So, but definitely Isabashi is a very, very prominent official. In fact, Isabashi at one time was a commanding officer of Goa headquarters. So he was assigned in Goa at one time, and they was reading over the exchange of notes between Major Padua and Isabashi, and you will be amazed. They were exchanging notes about giving each other tobacco. Sabi niya, nagsirisigalyo kang una yung tobacco ngaya para maglipot-lipot ang utok mo. So, then we will talk about ngaya peace in order to deal sa banwaan na niyo. Let's stop fighting each other. Let's do these things. Quite interesting. And that is one of the aspects of World War II which we have not explored, the friendly atmosphere. And in fact, there was a Japanese assigned in Ateneo de Naga at one time, who was a very, very devout Catholic. I was reading a memoir of a certain Larauri, who was a young boy, was 11 years old during the war. They have a cafe, Larauri in Naga. And I think the cafe, Larauri, is where you have now these bigs in front of the seminar of the cathedral. And he was saying that this guy would always go to the cathedral almost every day to pray. Yet he was the commanding officer of the Japanese in Naga. Unfortunately, he died before the liberation. Who killed him? This is an interesting thing. He said he was killed by his fellow Japanese. The reason? Because he was defending the Filipinos. Because the Japanese, towards the end of the war now, had been killing everyone. I think I'm not sure about the particular town. And for that reason, this Japanese officer did not want it. So, that's quite an anecdote. And the other side of World War II history, we have not actually examined. Last?
All right. Last question to go.
Last question? You have any? Ken.
Sergio, please do the honors of asking the last.
Then,
Councilor.
would it be proper if you confirm stories from former veterans I gathered? Ang iba nga ni Gadana, ang istorya is that the Wong family of the New China restaurant, yung pinakaano nila is actually married to a Japanese woman. Is that true? And this Japanese woman is very kind to the Nagueños, and the restaurant is a respected establishment even before the war and during the war. So that mayong nangyari sa Wong family, despite having a Japanese woman in the family, I would like that to be confirmed from a historian like no other than Danny Herona.
Thank you, Kawad Joe. Yeah, actually that's true. That's also the reason why, because the fact that the wife of Apang, siguro pamilya si Councilor Jose, The guy there was itong old man kang New China who died a few years ago. It was Chinese. Pero agom niya, Japanese. I forgot the Miyahira, I forgot the surname, but I have the surname of the wife. There's the reason why they were ordered arrested towards the end of the war by Major Miranda because of, apparently because the wife was Japanese. But then, tama sabi ni Councilor Joe, they were cleared because they were very, very good. In fact, si Apang and the New China had been very, very supportive and very friendly with, they were protecting the Filipinos. May anecdote nga dyan si Major Miranda. One time, Major Miranda asked me to have him interviewed for a pelikula, for a film. Because he said, binabakal daan ni Ramon Revilla ang biography niya for a film. Pero sabi, I find it quite funny, sabi niya ni, pero nga buo kay Revilla, gusto nga kay Fernando po. So may taste man sigurang. Sabi niya, okay, so we had a long series of interviews and he was telling me all the story, a lot of unknown histories of the guerrilla. And sabi niya, ang pacification campaign New China is a very, very important historic place during the war. Because sabi niya, yan ang New China used to be made of wood, pang concrete. And when the pacification happened, he was fetched by the Japanese dyan sa Tabuco, coming from Tona, and the Japanese were lined up from Tabuco, going to that area din in New China because they are going to have their, what he calls, a peace talk. So magkakaigo sila ng peace talk dyan sa New China. So pag-abot niya na dyan, sabi niya, gusto niya sa ko, yayabang niya. Nakamaong ngayon ako. Na maong na jacket, nakakopya ngayon ako kay itong American cowboy. Si 45 ko ngayon naka-agdidiyo and may dara may saro pa ngayon ko digdiyo. Paglaw ko ngayon sa Naga, sabi niya, garong ngayon ako aktor. Because everyone was watching me ngayon. They said, oh, si Miranda, yan si Miranda ngayon. And they went to New China and talked with the Japanese commanding officer of Ateneo de Naga. And while they were there down, he was laughing loudly because ang lanog da kang New China nag-collapse. Because nagrurumo si mga, they were crowding, the people of Naga were crowding just to see who Miranda was. And nag-collapse da ito. And so they proceeded eventually to Ateneo de Naga. But unfortunately, he was detained in Ateneo de Naga. It was not a pacification. It was a capitulation in some way. And then, final touch, and important ini sa mga kagawad kang Naga. Because there was someone here who had been maligned historically for a long time. This guy became a counselor in Naga. I think I mentioned it to you, Pading Mon. There was a certain counselor here who was accused of Japanese collaboration. And this guy was the one who spared the life of Major Miranda. Takan yaon da siya, dinara sa Ateneo, dinara siya sa Pasakaw, supposedly to be brought to Manila to meet with the high command of the Japanese in Manila. But pag-abot niya da sa Pasakaw, unfortunately, taga Tabuco ini yung dating counselor na ini. Takorda. Siberiano Takorda. And I think to all people, they always associate him as a collaborator. But sabi ni Miranda, they did not know who this guy was. Si Takorda because he was the interpreter of the Japanese in Ateneo de Naga. So when he was being brought to Pasakaw, nag-iba si Takorda. While they were there in a house, supposedly waiting for a ship to bring them to Manila, Takorda was asked by the Japanese na magtimpla ng kape. And so while they were preparing for coffee, they were talking, the Japanese officials were talking. And actually, learned that they were not going to bring Miranda to Manila. They are going to execute Miranda in Pasakaw. So, dikit-dikit sabi niya, sabi ni Major, buminaba na yan si Takorda, went to him, and told him, Major, dahil ka dadaraon sa Manila, gagadanon ka. So sabi ni Takorda, mag-swimming ka na dagat. So that's what he did. Ang ginimo niya nag-request na siyang permission sa puta, udto kuha nga ako, maparigos nga ako, nagkuha da siya ning very ingenious. Nagkuha da siya ning paklang ning tapayas. Kinuha to may labot baga to, and he went from the lower portion until the deeper portion and went to the mangrove in Pasakaw and off he escaped the Japanese. Sabi niya, I could not repay what Takorda did to me. He was a loyal Filipino officer. But then, people thought he was a Japanese collaborator. It's a very interesting saga of the war. So, yan, tama itong sabi ko. Just, I hope I answered the Councilor Joe yung question. Thank you very much for...
Thank you very much, Sir Danny, for the insightful lecture. So let's have a 5-minute break, and we'll have our closing ceremony after our break. Thank you very much, everyone.